Davenport.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the residents of Davenport, it's an absolute honor for me to have this opportunity to rise today and engage in the third reading of Bill C-77, entitled Enact to Amend the National Defence Act and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts. This bill amends provisions of the National Defence Act government. This bill amends the provisions of the National Defence Act in terms of the governance of the military justice system, and it adds a new section on the Declaration of Victim Rights to the Code of Service Discipline that specifies the victims of service offences that have a right to information, protection, participation, and restitution in respect to service offences. It adds or amends several definitions, including victim and military justice system participant rights, and specifies who may act on the victim's behalf for the purposes of that division. And I'm so pleased to speak about how Bill C-77 is part of a broader effort that our government is making to increase diversity and inclusiveness within the Canadian Armed Forces. Canada's unique, diverse, and multicultural population is one of its greatest strengths, and we are determined to see that strength reflected in Canada's military. We know that embracing diversity and drawing on all the strengths of Canada's diverse population will enhance military operational effectiveness, and that is why Canada's defence policy, it's called Strong, Secure, Engaged, makes diversity and inclusion a core institutional value for the Canadian Armed Forces. Canadians know that diversity is our strength, and we will always champion that. A diverse and inclusive Canadian Armed Forces starts with a respectful and open work environment for all. Strong, Secure, and Engaged has identified several initiatives that will help our military continue to cultivate a culture of respect, and it is delivering on all of them. Madam Speaker, we are making sure that the Canadian Armed Forces has the ability to respond effectively and appropriately to anyone who discriminates against fellow service members. Through Bill C-77, we're calling for increased sentences and sanctions for service offences and infractions when there is evidence that they are motivated by bias, hate, or prejudice based on gender expression or identity. This focus on deterring crimes based in hate for those whose gender expression or identity differ from our own is an important step in the significant progress the forces have made in changing its culture to one of greater inclusion, greater inclusivity and diversity. These changes will help the defense team ensure it remains an institution based in honor, integrity, honesty. But the changes proposed in Bill C-77 are not the only steps the forces are taking. Through Operation Honour, the Canadian Armed Forces continues its vital work to eliminate harmful and inappropriate sexual behaviour. Above all else, they are putting their focus on support for people affected by inappropriate sexual behaviour. That includes expanding the role and mandate of the Sexual Misconduct Response Centre, also known as SMRC, to make it the authoritative voice on victim support and advocacy. As the Sexual Misconduct Response Centre assumes this increased responsibility, it has already established itself as a leader in this field. This past December, the SMRC hosted the first ever Five Eyes Forum on preventing and addressing sexual misconduct, allowing experts from Canada, the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand to share with and learn from one another. Madam Speaker, these efforts will also help national defence be even greater leaders in achieving a gender-balanced military. We should all be proud that Canada is already a world leader in this area. And indeed, as of January of this year, there are 15,116 women in the Canadian Armed Forces. That's 15.7% of our military and significantly more than the NATO average of 11%. And I'll also mention, Madam Speaker, that I was honored to recently visit the Canadian Armed Forces mission in Mali, who are participating in MINUSMA, which is the UN Multidimensional Integration Stabilization Mission. And right now, their numbers are at 14%. So of all those that are deployed there, about 14% are women. And I know that that compares to about 4% in terms of the UN and all its other missions. So I know we have a long way to go, but we've already made great progress, and I think we do have to celebrate the progress we've managed to make. Through strong, secure, engaged, we are increasing the percentage of women in the military to 25%. So that's our target, 25% by 2026. And the Canadian Armed Forces has undertaken a number of activities to meet this goal. And I'll go through some of that in a minute, Madam Speaker, but I'll also say that right now, National Defence Committee is actually looking at how is it that we increase diversity in the Canadian Armed Forces, and we're definitely looking to put forward a number of other policy ideas and a number of other immediate action steps on how is it that we can accelerate the number of not only women, but those from visible minorities, those from the LGBTQ2 community, as well as the Indigenous community, among others, within our Canadian Armed Forces. So getting back to some of the additional activities that we are taking, or the Canadian Armed Forces are taking, to meet the goal of 25% by 2026. First, what it has done, it has established a team of representatives from across the military, the federal government, and the private sector to examine recruiting strategies for women joining the defense team. And so what I want to point out there, Madam Speaker, is that we've actually gone outside of government to say, let's take some of the best ideas so that we can actually achieve our goal of 25% by 2026. We've also the Canadian Armed Forces has also introduced policies and practices that promote a healthy family and work-life balance. And I'll tell you, Madam Speaker, I was blessed also to join the Canadian Navy, the HMCS Charlottetown, during the summer. And I know when I talked to women there, they said that more and more women are actually joining because on the Navy front, they've done a wonderful job of really improving work-life balance and making it easier for people to have families and support their families while they are pursuing their career in the Canadian Navy. But Madam Speaker, diversity is more than just gender. The Canadian Armed Forces also has specific initiatives underway to increase its diversity across a broad spectrum of ethnicity, religion, age, experience, language, and more. The Canadian Armed Forces continues to modernize, streamline, and standardize recruiting to make sure that it is truly welcoming to all applicants. It has recruiters who are multilingual and from a wide range of ethnic backgrounds. These recruiters receive extensive training designed to help them understand and be attuned to cultural norms that may differ from their own backgrounds and beliefs. This has helped improve communication and potential recruits, which in turn has alleviated many of the misconceptions that visible minority applicants sometimes have regarding the military. The Canadian Armed Forces has also made important changes to the way it welcomes people of different backgrounds into the military. While the military maintains strict dress regulations for professional and operational purposes, it refuses to allow those regulations to be a barrier for someone who wishes to join. As important as all these initiatives are, we also have to recognize the impact of past actions. In November 2017, our Prime Minister rose in this House to issue a formal apology to Canadian members of the LGBTQ2 community for historic injustices inflicted upon them in this country. That included many members of the Canadian Armed Forces who were not just discriminated against, but interrogated and persecuted for nearly 40 years to what has become known infamously as the Purge. We can never undo the damage of this persecution, Madam Speaker, but we can recognize and remember the pain that it caused and also apologize in order for us to be able to move on and make the changes that we made. And we're doing just that with the Canadian Pride Citation. Members of the Canadian Armed Forces who are directly impacted by anti-LGBTQ2 policies and practices can wear the Canadian Pride Citation on their uniform. The citation stands as an acknowledgement and reminder of past injustices and as an affirmation of our commitment to ensure that this dark chapter of our history never happens again. We also just, in closing, over a year ago, the military launched the Positive Space Initiative to promote a safe and inclusive environment for all regarding sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Happy to answer more questions on that, Madam Speaker. But what I do want to say is that I'm very proud of the actions that we've taken to date, and I ask everyone in this House to support Bill C-77. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the member for her intervention today. She's talking about some of the challenges that occur in Canadian Armed Forces, and of course, Bill C-77 incorporates the Gladue decision from the Supreme Court to ensure that Indigenous members of the Canadian Armed Forces will have a chance to, at time of sentencing, make sure that any cultural sensitivities are taken into consideration. Now, we just witnessed an unfortunate event over the last few weeks where the former Associate Minister of Defence, who is also the former Attorney General, a very proud Indigenous leader, was forced to resign. And I'd like to know from the member why the former Associate Minister of Defence left her office.
The honourable member for Davenport.
Madam Speaker, thank you so much. I want to thank the honourable member for standing up and asking me a question. I will, though, just focus my comments on Bill C-77, and he talked about the Indigenous population. And as we mentioned, we are actually trying to increase the number of Indigenous peoples within our Canadian Armed Forces. I will tell you two key things that we're really focused on in Bill C-77. What we've done is Bill C-77 includes Indigenous sentencing provisions, which require military tribunals to consider the circumstances of Indigenous offenders at sentencing, as it is the case in civilian justice system. And the other thing, Madam Speaker, I want to point out is that through Bill C-77, we're ensuring that Indigenous people are given the same rights and respect in the military as in civilian courts. Thank the member for his question, and I look forward to others.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Toronto Danforth for her speech. And I'd like to ask her, this is not a subject that I'm very familiar with, military justice, but in that context, self-harm is considered an offense and it's punishable. And I'd like to know what my colleague's take is on this idea. It seems to be something that people know about, and this new legislation doesn't change that. It still remains an offense, and if a person has a problem with self-harm, it must be hard to try to seek out some help if you're at risk of being penalized.
Thank you, and thank you so much. Thank you for the excellent question, although I am the member of Toronto of Davenport, although many people do confuse the honourable member from Toronto Danforth and myself, and that's okay, but I did want to correct it for the record. I would say, Madam Speaker, it's an excellent question. Self-harm is absolutely something that was brought to the attention of the committee. It was mentioned, is there some adjustment that we could actually make to Bill C-77 for us to be able to address all of the concerns around self-harm? I will tell you that because the bill, just the context of the bill didn't allow us to actually address that particular issue, but we recognize that we need to continue to adapt our approach to care and to those suffering from mental health issues. And that's why our minister invited the National Defence Committee to study the issue of suicide and self-harm within the Canadian Armed Forces with a view of providing our recommendations related to these challenges, specifically as it relates to self-harm, Madam Speaker. So I want to let you know we've acknowledged that this is an issue. There was an impassioned plea by a mother who was affected by a Canadian Armed Forces member who was impacted by this particular issue. And so we made a commitment to look at it, and we will continue to take this very seriously moving forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate.